The sound of wheels crunching against gravel suddenly halted as Julia Harper clutched her valise tightly, watching in disbelief as her brother Thomas's wagon pulled away. "Thomas, wait!" she cried out, her voice cracking in the dry Montana air. But he didn't stop, didn't even look back as the distance between them grew with every passing second, leaving her stranded on the desolate road with nothing but her trunk, carpet bag, and the cruel afternoon sun beating down on her in the summer of 1885. Julia collapsed onto her trunk, tears streaming down her dust-coated face. At 22, she had never imagined her own brother would abandon her on the way to their new life in Helena. Their parents' deaths 6 months prior had left Thomas as her only family, but his growing resentment over having to care for her had finally boiled over. The argument about her refusal to marry his gambling friend Malcolm had been the final straw. "You'll regret this, Thomas Harper." She shouted at the now distant wagon, her words carried away by the wind that swept across the vast Montana landscape. Hours passed as Julia sat by her belongings, the sun dropping lower in the sky. The road remained empty, not a single traveler in sight. Panic began to set in as she realized night would fall soon, and she was miles from any town, with wolves and worse roaming the wilderness. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her stand quickly, smoothing down her travel-worn dress. A tall figure on horseback appeared over the ridge, silhouetted against the orange sky. Julia hesitated, unsure whether to flag him down or hide. Tales of bandits and unsavory characters were common in these parts. The rider slowed as he spotted her, turning his horse toward her position. As he drew closer, Julia could make out a broad-shouldered man with a weathered face under the brim of his Stetson. His clothes were dusty but well kept, and the horse beneath him was a magnificent chestnut stallion. "Madam," he called out, stopping a respectful distance away. "You all right out here? Not the safest place to be resting." Julia swallowed hard, lifting her chin. "My brother and I had a disagreement. He continued on without me." The man's expression darkened as he surveyed the road ahead, then back to her and her luggage. "Left you here alone." His voice carried genuine concern and a hint of anger. "That's not just disagreeable, that's downright dangerous." "I'm afraid so," Julia admitted. "I'm Julia Harper, sir. I was heading to Helena." He dismounted with fluid grace, removing his hat to reveal thick dark hair with hints of gray at the temples. "Dane Irwin," he replied, giving a slight bow of his head. "I own the Double Creek Ranch about 5 miles east of here." Julia studied him carefully. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with clear blue eyes that held her gaze steadily. There was something reassuring in his straightforward manner. "Miss Harper, night's coming fast, and this road isn't safe after dark. I can offer you shelter at my ranch until you figure out your next move." He gestured to the distant hills. "Or I can escort you to Timber Falls, though that's a good day's ride from here." Julia hesitated, weighing her limited options. "How do I know I can trust you, Mr. Irwin?" A small smile crossed his face. "Fair question. Truth is, you don't. But I give you my word as a gentleman that you'll be safe at my ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Wilkins, is there, and she's a proper woman who'd sooner skin me alive than let me act improperly." Julia felt a curious mixture of fear and relief. She had little choice but to trust someone, and something in Dane Irwin's steady gaze made her believe him. "I would be grateful for your help then." Dane nodded, lifting her trunk with surprising ease. "Let's secure your things and we'll be on our way before it gets dark." He tied her trunk to his horse and helped Julia mount, handling her as if she were made of fine china. Then he climbed up behind her, maintaining a respectful distance while ensuring she was secure. "Hold on, Miss Harper," he said, his voice close to her ear as he reached around to take the reins. The warmth of his chest against her back was both alarming and comforting as they set off toward his ranch. The ride was silent for the most part, with Julia acutely aware of the stranger whose arms encircled but didn't touch her. As they crested a hill, a sprawling ranch came into view in the valley below a substantial main house, several outbuildings, corrals filled with cattle and horses. Double Creek, Dane announced. Named for the two streams that cross the property, been building it up for 8 years now. Julia couldn't help but be impressed. It's beautiful. They approached the main house, a 2-story structure built of sturdy timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front. A plump, gray-haired woman emerged as they arrived, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. Mr. Irwin. Who's this poor girl, Mrs. Wilkins? This is Miss Julia Harper. Her brother left her stranded on the Timber Falls Road. She'll be staying with us tonight. The housekeeper's face creased with indignation. Left you? Why, that's criminal. Come inside, dear. You look half dead with exhaustion. Julia allowed herself to be ushered into the house, surprised by its comfortable interior. Unlike many frontier homes, this one had polished wood floors, actual wallpaper in the sitting room, and furniture that spoke of care and quality rather than mere function. I'll have a bath drawn for you, Mrs. Wilkins said, leading Julia upstairs, and find you something clean to wear. Mr. Irwin's sister left some dresses here last time she visited. You look about her size. Julia tried to protest, but the motherly woman wouldn't hear of it. Nonsense. You've had a terrible ordeal. Let us help you. Later, soaking in a copper tub of warm water, Julia finally allowed herself to relax. The events of the day washed over her Thomas's cruel abandonment, the hours of fearful waiting, and the unexpected rescue by the handsome rancher. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, at least, she was safe. Dinner was a surprisingly elegant affair. Dane Irwin, now dressed in clean clothes, his hair still damp from his own washing up, stood as she entered the dining room. The borrowed dress fit reasonably well, though it was a bit loose in the bodice. You look much refreshed, Miss Harper, he said, pulling out a chair for her. Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Irwin. And yours, Mrs. Wilkins, Julia added as the housekeeper brought in a steaming pot of stew. Over dinner, Julia shared more of her story, how her parents had died of influenza during the harsh winter, leaving her and Thomas to manage their failing farm in Minnesota. Thomas decided to sell everything and head west. He has a friend in Helena who promised him work. She hesitated, then added, he wanted me to marry his friend Malcolm, a man twice my age with a fondness for cards and whiskey. When I refused, things became difficult between us. Dane's jaw tightened. No man should force his sister to marry against her will, especially not to solve his own problems. Do you have family waiting in Helena? Mrs. Wilkins asked gently. Julia shook her head. No one. I was relying on Thomas until I could find work as a teacher or seamstress. Dane exchanged a glance with his housekeeper. Well, you're welcome here until you decide what to do next. Timber Falls has a small school, though I don't know if they need a teacher. That's very kind, but I couldn't impose. It's no imposition, Dane insisted. We have plenty of room, and Mrs. Wilkins has been saying she could use some female company. Mrs. Wilkins nodded vigorously. Indeed I have. This house is too big for just the two of us, especially with Mr. Irwin out working most days. Julia felt overwhelmed by their kindness. I don't know what to say. Say you'll stay at least until you're rested and have a plan, Dane suggested with a smile that transformed his serious face. Besides, I've been meaning to ride into Timber Falls. I can make inquiries about work opportunities for you. That night, lying in a comfortable bed in a clean nightgown, Julia wondered at the strange turn her life had taken. She had gone from abandoned and desperate to housed and cared for in the space of a few hours. As she drifted off to sleep, her last thoughts were of Dane Irwin's kind blue eyes and the strange flutter they caused in her chest. The next morning, Julia woke to sunlight streaming through lace curtains. For a moment, she was disoriented, then remembered where she was. Dressing in another of the borrowed dresses, she made her way downstairs. She found Mrs. Wilkins in the kitchen, kneading bread dough. Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well? Better than I have in months, Julia admitted. May I help with something? The older woman's face brightened. I wouldn't say no to an extra pair of hands. Can you finish chopping those vegetables for the stew? As they worked together, Julia learned more about Dane Irwin. He had come west from Boston 10 years ago, determined to build something of his own away from his wealthy family's shipping business. He started with nothing but determination and a good head for business, Mrs. Wilkins said proudly. Now Double Creek is one of the most successful ranches in the territory. He seems very capable, Julia said carefully. Mrs. Wilkins smiled knowingly. He's a good man, Miss Harper. The best I've known, save for my late husband. He works hard, treats his men fairly, and hasn't let success change his character. Does he have a wife? Julia asked, then blushed at her own directness. No, Mrs. Wilkins said, a twinkle in her eye, though not for lack of interested parties. The widow Johnson in town has been setting her cap for him for years, and even Mayor Patterson's daughter makes excuses to ride out this way. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. But Mr. Irwin says he's waiting for someone who sees more than the ranch and his bank account. Julia was saved from responding by the sound of boots on the porch. Dane entered, bringing the scent of horses and open air with him. "Good morning, ladies," he said, removing his hat. His eyes lingered on Julia for a moment. "I hope you slept well, Miss Harper." "Very well, thank you," she replied, suddenly conscious of her borrowed dress and loose hair. "I'm heading into town today. Is there anything particular you'd like me to ask about regarding employment?" Julia considered. "I completed Teachers College in St. Paul, but I'm also skilled at sewing and bookkeeping. My father believed girls should be as educated as boys." Dane nodded approvingly. "A man ahead of his time. I'll see what I can find out." After he left, Julia helped Mrs. Wilkins with the laundry and baking. The physical work was a welcome distraction from her uncertain future. By mid-afternoon, they had finished the day's tasks, and Mrs. Wilkins insisted Julia rest. "I'm going to lie down myself," the housekeeper said. "These old bones need more rest than they used to." Left to her own devices, Julia explored the house. The library particularly captured her attention. Shelves of books lined 2 walls, more volumes than she had ever seen outside of her teacher's college. She was so absorbed in examining the collection that she didn't hear Dane return. "Find something that interests you?" His deep voice startled her. Julia turned to find him watching her with an amused expression. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry." No apology needed. Books are meant to be read, not just displayed. He moved closer, selecting a volume from a nearby shelf. "This one's a favorite. Thoreau's Walden. Have you read it?" "Yes, at school. I found his ideas about self-reliance quite compelling." Julia accepted the book he offered. "Did you have any luck in town?" Dane's expression grew serious. "Some news, though I'm not sure how you'll take it. The school already has a teacher, but Mrs. Evans at the general store mentioned needing help. Her eyes aren't what they used to be for detailed work like inventory and correspondence." Julia's heart lifted. "That sounds promising." "There's more," Dane continued, hesitating. "Your brother passed through Timber Falls yesterday afternoon. Apparently he was telling anyone who would listen that his troublesome sister had decided to stay behind in Billings." Julia's face flushed with anger. "So he's covering his tracks, making sure no one knows he abandoned me on the road." "It appears so." Dane's voice was gentle but contained a hard edge. "I nearly rode after him when I heard, but thought you should decide how to handle it." "What is there to handle? He's made his choice clear." Julia's voice trembled slightly. "I need to make my own way now." Dane studied her face. "You're a remarkably strong woman, Miss Harper." "Not really," she admitted. "I'm terrified, but what choice do I have but to move forward?" "We all have choices," Dane said quietly, "and for what it's worth, I think you're making the right one." He paused, then added, "I told Mrs. Evans you might visit her tomorrow. I offered to drive you into town." "Thank you," Julia said, genuinely moved by his continued kindness. "For everything." That evening, Julia found herself more at ease in Dane's company. Over dinner, he told stories about building his ranch, the challenges of harsh winters and dry summers, and his dreams for the future. "I want to breed horses, not just cattle," he explained. "There's a special kind of freedom in a good horse, something that speaks to the soul." Julia found herself entranced by the passion in his voice. You sound like a poet, Mr. Irwin, he laughed, a warm sound that filled the room. Hardly, just a man who knows what he loves. Later, sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains, Julia felt a strange sense of peace despite her circumstances. Dane sat nearby in a rocking chair, smoking a pipe, the sweet scent of tobacco mingling with the evening air. "You miss your family in Boston?" she asked. Dane considered the question. "Sometimes. My parents didn't understand why I'd choose this life over the family business. My sister visits occasionally, but she finds Montana too rustic for her taste." He glanced at Julia. "What about you? Besides your brother, do you have other family?" Julia shook her head. "No one close. My mother had a sister in Philadelphia, but we lost touch years ago," she sighed. "It's strange to feel so untethered." "Untethered can mean trapped or it can mean free," Dane observed. "Depends on how you look at it." The insight struck Julia deeply. Perhaps Thomas had unwittingly given her a gift, the freedom to choose her own path, without his expectations weighing her down. The next day, Dane drove Julia to Timber Falls in his wagon. The small frontier town consisted of one main street with wooden boardwalks fronting various businesses: the general store, a saloon, a small hotel, the sheriff's office, and a few other establishments. Mrs. Evans, the storekeeper, was a thin, bird-like woman with spectacles perched on her nose. She greeted Dane warmly and studied Julia with shrewd eyes. "So you're the young lady Mr. Irwin mentioned. Do you have experience with bookkeeping?" "Yes, madam. I kept the accounts for my father's farm and received high marks in mathematics at school." After a brief discussion of duties and wages, Mrs. Evans offered Julia the position on a trial basis. "You can start Monday next if that suits. Room and board is included. There's a small apartment above the store." Julia accepted gratefully, though as they left the store, she felt a curious mixture of relief and disappointment. She had secured employment and lodging, exactly what she needed, yet the thought of leaving Double Creek and Dane Irwin caused an unexpected ache in her chest. "That went well," Dane commented as they walked back to the wagon. "Mrs. Evans doesn't impress easily." "I'm very fortunate," Julia agreed, forcing brightness into her voice. They stopped at the mercantile, where Dane insisted on purchasing fabric and notions so Julia could make herself some proper clothing. "Consider it an advance on your wages," he said when she protested. "You can repay me when you're settled." On the drive back to the ranch, they passed a rider heading into town. The man tipped his hat to Dane but stared openly at Julia with an expression that made her uncomfortable. "Who was that?" she asked when they were out of earshot. Dane's face had hardened. "Malcolm Reeves. Gambler, troublemaker, and occasional ranch hand when he needs money." Julia felt the blood drain from her face. "Malcolm? Thomas's friend Malcolm?" The same man her brother had tried to force her to marry. Dane looked at her sharply. "You know him. He's the man Thomas wanted me to marry." Julia's hands trembled in her lap. "If he's here, he'll tell Thomas he saw me." Dane's jaw tightened. "Let him. You have nothing to fear, Julia. You're making your own way now." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and despite her anxiety, Julia felt warmed by the intimacy it suggested. That night, Julia could barely sleep, worried that Malcolm would bring Thomas back to confront her. What would her brother do? Force her to continue with him to Helena? Demand she marry Malcolm after all? A soft knock on her door startled her from her anxious thoughts. She opened it to find Dane standing there, fully dressed despite the late hour. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said quietly, "but I thought you should know. Malcolm Reeves came by the ranch asking about you. I told him you weren't staying here, but I don't think he believed me. I've asked 2 of my men to keep watch tonight, just in case." Julia's heart raced with fear and gratitude. "Thank you. I'm sorry to bring trouble to your home." Dane's expression softened. "You've brought no trouble." "The trouble belongs to men who think they can control a woman's life against her will." He hesitated, then added, "Try to rest. I won't let anything happen to you." The next day passed in tense anticipation, but neither Malcolm nor Thomas appeared. Julia spent the hours sewing new dresses from the fabric Dane had purchased, grateful for the distraction of the detailed work. Mrs. Wilkins taught her how to make Dane's favorite apple pie, and the domestic tranquility of the day almost made Julia forget the threat hanging over her. Almost, but not quite. On Sunday, Dane suggested they attend church services in Timber Falls. "Best to face the town directly," he said. "Let them see you're a respectable woman making an honest start." Julia agreed, though her stomach twisted with nerves. Dressed in her new blue calico dress, with Mrs. Wilkins's borrowed shawl and bonnet, she felt more presentable than she had in months. The small white church was filled with curious faces when Dane escorted Julia and Mrs. Wilkins inside. Julia felt the weight of their stares but held her head high as they took seats near the front. After the service, Dane introduced her to several townspeople, including the mayor and his wife. Julia was relieved to find most were welcoming, though she noticed a few women eyeing her with undisguised suspicion, particularly a well-dressed blonde woman who barely acknowledged Dane's introduction. "That's Vivian Johnson," Mrs. Wilkins whispered as they moved away. "The widow I mentioned. She's not happy to see Mr. Irwin escorting another woman to church." Julia blushed. "We're not, I mean, he's just being kind to me." Mrs. Wilkins gave her a knowing look but said nothing more. As they prepared to leave, Malcolm Reeves appeared at the church steps. His smile didn't reach his cold eyes as he approached them. "Miss Harper, what a surprise. Your brother said you'd stayed behind in Billings." Dane moved slightly in front of Julia. "Miss Harper's business is her own, Reeves." Malcolm's smile turned nasty. "Is it? Seems to me Thomas would want to know his sister is alive and well. Maybe I should send him word in Helena. Or perhaps you should mind your own affairs," Dane suggested, his voice deceptively pleasant. "Unless you'd like to discuss some of your activities at the Silverton mine last month. I hear Sheriff Blake is still investigating that card game." Malcolm's face paled slightly. He tipped his hat with exaggerated politeness. "Just being neighborly, Irwin. Good day, Miss Harper." As they drove back to the ranch, Julia finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "What happened at the Silverton mine?" Dane's face was grim. "Malcolm was caught dealing from the bottom of the deck. A man died in the fight that followed. Sheriff couldn't prove Malcolm fired the fatal shot, but everyone knows he was responsible." Julia shuddered. "And Thomas wanted me to marry him. Your brother doesn't strike me as a man of good judgment." Dane's hands tightened on the reins. "Julia, I want you to be careful in town. Malcolm's not one to forget a slight." The use of her first name again sent a warm flutter through her chest despite her fear. "I will be." The week passed quickly as Julia prepared to move to town. Dane insisted on having one of his men check the apartment above the store, making sure it was secure and proper for a single woman. Mrs. Wilkins packed a basket of provisions and homemade preserves to start your pantry, and even altered a warm shawl for the coming fall weather. On her last night at Double Creek, Dane asked Julia to join him for a walk after dinner. The evening was mild, with a million stars visible in the clear sky. They strolled toward the creek that gave the ranch its name, the sound of running water a gentle backdrop to their conversation. "You've brought something special to this place, Julia," Dane said suddenly. "It's been more like a home this past week than in all the years since I built it." Julia's heart quickened. "I've been happy here. Happier than I expected to be after what happened with Thomas." They stopped at the creek bank, watching the water glisten in the moonlight. Dane turned to face her, his expression serious. "I know you're set on making your own way, and I respect that, but I want you to know that you'll always have a place at Double Creek if you want it." Julia searched his face. "As what, Mr. Irwin, your housekeeper's assistant?" His eyes held her steadily. "No, as whatever you want to be." He took a deep breath. "I know it's too soon and probably too forward, but I find myself thinking about you in ways that go beyond mere friendship or charity." Julia felt her face flush with warmth. I've had similar thoughts." Dane took her hand gently. "I'm not asking for promises, just possibility. Would you consider visiting here on your days off, getting to know each other better? I'd like that very much, Julia whispered, her heart so full she could barely speak. His smile in the moonlight made her breath catch. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Dane leaned down and brushed his lips against hers in the lightest of kisses. It was brief, proper, yet it sent a current of warmth through Julia's entire body. When they walked back to the house, her hand remained in his, a silent acknowledgement of something new and precious growing between them. Monday morning arrived with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Dane drove Julia to town himself, her new trunk packed with her few possessions and the clothes she'd made. The apartment above the store was small but clean, with a sitting room, tiny bedroom, and a kitchen area with a cook stove. Mrs. Evans showed Julia the store's ledgers and explained her duties. By noon, Julia was arranging stock and helping customers, finding satisfaction in the simple work and the independence it represented. Throughout the day, various townspeople stopped by, some genuinely needing supplies, others clearly curious about the newcomer. Julia met each with polite friendliness, determined to establish herself as a respectable woman. Just before closing time, the bell above the door jingled. Julia looked up to see Thomas standing there, his face thunderous. "So it's true," he spat. "Malcolm said he'd seen you, but I didn't believe him." "What game are you playing, Julia?" She straightened her spine, grateful that Mrs. Evans was in the stockroom. "No game, Thomas. You left me on the road to fend for myself. I've done exactly that. By taking up with Dane Irwin," Thomas sneered. "The whole territory is talking about how he brought you to his ranch. Your reputation is in tatters." "My reputation is intact," Julia replied firmly. "Mr. Irwin and his housekeeper showed me Christian charity when my own brother abandoned me. Now I've found respectable employment and lodging." Thomas stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're coming with me to Helena. I've already told Malcolm you'll reconsider his offer." "No." The word came out stronger than Julia had expected. "I'm staying here. My life is my own now, Thomas." "You gave up any right to direct it when you left me on that road." Her brother's face contorted with rage. He grabbed her arm roughly. "You ungrateful little, I believe the lady asked you to leave her be." Dane's voice from the doorway was calm but carried a dangerous edge. Thomas released Julia's arm but turned to face the rancher with a sneer. "This is family business, Irwin. Stay out of it. When you put your hands on a woman in anger, it becomes everyone's business." Dane moved to stand beside Julia. "Miss Harper has made her choice clear. I suggest you respect it." Thomas looked from Dane to Julia, noting their united stance. "So that's how it is. Well, don't come crying to me when he tires of you." "That's enough," Mrs. Evans said sharply, emerging from the back room. "Mr. Harper, I'll thank you to leave my store and my employee in peace." Thomas glared at them all, then stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Julia's legs trembled so badly she had to sit down. Dane knelt beside her chair, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though tears threatened. "I never thought he could be so cruel." "Some people show their true nature only when they don't get their way," Mrs. Evans observed sagely. "Now, Mr. Irwin, would you escort Miss Harper upstairs? I think she needs a moment to compose herself." In the privacy of her small apartment, Julia finally allowed the tears to fall. Dane stood awkwardly by the door, offering his handkerchief. "I'm sorry," she said, dabbing at her eyes. "I thought I was stronger than this." "You are strong," Dane said firmly. "Standing up to family is the hardest thing anyone can do." Julia managed a watery smile. "Thank you for being here. How did you know?" "I didn't. I came to town on business and thought I'd check on you." His expression grew serious. "Julia, I'm worried about Thomas and Malcolm. They might not give up so easily." "What can they do? I'm employed, housed, and of age. They have no legal right to force me to go anywhere." "Legal rights don't always matter out here." Dane ran a hand through his hair. "Would you consider, that is, I know it's very soon, but—" Julia looked at him curiously. "What are you trying to say, Dane?" He took a deep breath. "Would you consider marrying me, not tomorrow but soon? I know we're just beginning to know each other, but I care for you deeply already, and as my wife, you'd be protected from their schemes." Julia stared at him, stunned. "Are you proposing out of protection or something else?" Dane moved closer, taking her hands in his. "Both. I won't pretend the timing isn't influenced by circumstances, but my feelings are genuine. From the moment I found you on that road, something about you captured my heart. Your courage, your grace under pressure, your kindness." His blue eyes held hers earnestly. "I think we could build a good life together, Julia. If you'll give us a chance." Julia's heart raced. It was too soon, too fast, yet somehow felt absolutely right. "I care for you too, Dane, more than I thought possible in such a short time, but marriage, shouldn't we court properly first?" A smile lifted the corner of his mouth. "We can have the longest engagement you want, I want the world to know my intentions are honorable, and I want you to feel secure in your position here." Julia considered his words. A long engagement would allow them time to truly know one another, yet the promise of marriage would provide protection from Thomas and Malcolm's schemes. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I'll marry you, Dane Irwin, but not before spring. I want time to be sure we're truly suited." His face lit with joy. "Spring it is. May I call on you properly, Sunday dinners and church escorts and all?" Julia laughed, her earlier distress fading in the warmth of his obvious happiness. "Yes, that would be lovely." The weeks that followed were filled with work, discovery, and growing affection. Julia flourished at the general store, her organized mind and friendly manner making her invaluable to Mrs. Evans and popular with customers. On Wednesdays and Sundays, Dane would come to town, taking her for drives in his buggy or meals at the hotel restaurant. Thomas made one more attempt to confront her, appearing at the store with Malcolm in tow, but Sheriff Blake happened to be present. The lawman made it clear that Julia was a respected member of the community under his protection, and the two men left without further incident. A week later, Julia heard they had departed for Helena. As fall turned to winter, Julia spent more time at Double Creek, helping Mrs. Wilkins prepare for Christmas and learning about ranch operations from Dane. Each visit deepened her connection to the place and to the man who had created it. By Christmas Eve, when Dane presented her with a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond, Julia knew with certainty that her heart was truly his. "I know we agreed on spring," he said as they sat before the fireplace, the ranch house decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, "but would you consider a February wedding instead? Valentine's Day, perhaps?" Julia smiled, touching the ring that now adorned her finger. "Impatient, Mr. Irwin." "For a lifetime with you, absolutely." He pulled her close, his kiss deeper and more passionate than the careful ones they had shared before. When they broke apart, Julia's cheeks were flushed and her heart was racing. "February sounds perfect," she whispered. They were married in the Timber Falls Church on a crisp February morning, with Mrs. Wilkins weeping happily in the front pew and Mrs. Evans beaming beside her. Julia wore a dress of ivory silk that Dane had ordered all the way from San Francisco, and she had never felt more beautiful than when he looked at her with love and pride as they spoke their vows. That night, as snowflakes drifted past their bedroom window at Double Creek, Julia lay in her husband's arms, marveling at the journey that had brought her there. From abandoned and alone to cherished and beloved in the space of a few months. "What are you thinking?" Dane asked, stroking her hair as they lay in the soft darkness. "That sometimes the worst moments in life lead to the best," she replied. "If Thomas hadn't abandoned me on that road, I still would have found you," Dane interrupted gently. "Some things are meant to be, Julia Irwin." She smiled at her new name, turning to press her lips to his. "Then I'm very glad you found me, Cowboy." Spring brought new life to Double Creek calves in the pastures, foals in the stables, and seeds sprouting in Julia's newly planted garden. She had taken to ranch life with unexpected ease, finding joy in the rhythms of the land and the community they were building together. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Dane handed Julia a letter that had arrived in town that day. "It's from Thomas," he said quietly. With trembling hands, Julia opened it. Inside was a brief note expressing awkward regret for his actions and sharing news that he had married a widow in Helena and was working in her late husband's hardware store. "He says he hopes I'm well and—" "He's sorry," Julia said, tears welling in her eyes. "He doesn't ask for forgiveness, just says he was wrong." Dane squeezed her hand. "What do you want to do?" Julia considered the question carefully. "I think I'll write back. Tell him I'm happy and well, that I've found my place in the world." She looked at her husband with a gentle smile. "And that sometimes, being left on a road can lead exactly where you're meant to be." Dane pulled her into his embrace, his kiss tender and promising. In the distance, the Double Creek cattle grazed peacefully as the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in colors as vibrant and hopeful as the future stretching before them.